Hello and welcome to NPC, a show about the games that we take with us. I'm Federico Viticci and I'm joined by Brendon Bigley. Hey, Brendon.
Oh, hello. Nice to see you.
And we're also joined by John Voorhees. Hello, John.
Oh, hey, Federico. It's been a while since we last spoke.
I know. So this is a brand new show, and I couldn't be more excited to launch this new podcast on MacStories, and it's especially exciting because it's the kind of show that has been in the making for years, and then it sort of happened all at once. And you may have heard a new voice at the beginning of the show, Brendon Bigley. And John and I, we've known Brendon for quite some time. And I've personally been a huge fan of Brendon's other podcast, Into the Aether, for years now. And I've also enjoyed, Brendon, I should say, I've also enjoyed your recent return to blogging, I gotta say. It's been really fun. And so when we got we started this conversation about this show that we're going to describe shortly, and John and I couldn't think of a better person to join us. So I wanted to do, if that's okay with you guys, just a very short version of what this show is about before we talk about each of us individually and why we're here, what we're going to do. Is that okay?
That sounds great.
Good to me.
All right.
That sounds awesome. And thank you so much. That was very kind of you.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. So John and I, for years, we've had this idea that we wanted to do a show all about portable gaming. Specifically, I think this conversation started with the Nintendo Switch. And it started growing sort of inside our brains with the arrival of those first wave of Android and Linux-based handhelds years ago. I bought, obviously, some of them during the pandemic, during the lockdowns. And so I started thinking, hey, this is a fun new scene, fun new world that sort of takes me back to my childhood days of all these portable consoles. And then, of course, the Steam Deck happened and a bunch of other gaming handhelds happened. And we realized last year, we need to do a show about portable gaming. And the more we thought about it, the more we realized, well, it'd be fun to have somebody else who's maybe really plugged into the gaming scene more than John and I are. And so we thought, well, Brendon would be an excellent person to have on this show. And we knew that Brendon was into portable gaming and handhelds as well. And we got together and we came up. Actually, I think, who was it that came up with his name? John or Brendon? I don't remember.
I think it was John.
It was John.
It was.
Came up with the idea of NPC, which stands, well, it's not a non-playing character. I mean, it's obviously a pun, but it stands for Next Portable Console.
Right.
The idea being that this is the kind of show where we'll talk about, obviously, portable gaming, and the idea of next in the title, it sort of signifies the fact that this is a brand new, this market is constantly changing and evolving. It seems like every other week there's a new portable console, there's a new handheld, there's maybe a new A&EO handheld.
Yeah, we've been planning this show for about a month, and I think in that time, about 58 different handhelds have launched or been announced.
Yes, they have. They really have.
So that is the idea behind the show, and I wanted to hear from you both. Sort of what are you thinking about portable gaming, and why specifically you, Brendon? Obviously, yeah. I think John and I we've been doing app stories and Unwind in the MacStories family of podcasts for a few years now, and I think obviously MacStories listeners, I hope they should be familiar with us at this point.
Hopefully.
But Brendon, I obviously know you, but maybe our listeners or MacStories readers don't. So who is Brendon Bigley? That is my question.
Oh, wow. That's a big question.
I know. I know.
Yeah, I think primarily the way people know me is the way you know me, which is as the co-host of Into the Aether, which we consider to be a low-key video game podcast. At least that's the way that we pitch it. It frequently is not low-key, but I think low-key comes in the form of us not being beholden to the new video game release cycle. The idea being that if we are forced to cover everything that's new, we will eventually start having conversations about things that we don't like. And for my co-host Steven and I, the idea of hopping on a mic every week and just dunking on stuff that we didn't like didn't sound really appealing, especially considering the nature of podcasting and doing it for years and years and years. We've been doing it for just about 6 years at this point, and the idea of being like, okay, what did we hate this week? Just sounded terrible. So what that means is that we poke into the backlog of our video game libraries a lot, and we check out new stuff and old stuff in equal measure, which obviously has pointed me directly into the firing line of retro handhelds in this entire scene. Because I think same deal with you. You know, it was around early in the pandemic when I got my hands on my first retro handheld from Anbernic. It was the RG351P, and was just like over the moon about it as a device. We were at the time on Into the Aether doing an episode that was about the entire Game Boy Advance library. We were just doing like a retrospective on the entire console. So we got custom Game Boy Advances made, which was great for playing on original hardware. But I also picked up an RG351P as just like a more convenient way of carrying the entire Game Boy Advance library on me at all times. And I think from that point on, it's just been like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? Because from that point on, also the industry has absolutely exploded, and I don't know, that just makes this entire scene so fun to cover and so interesting, and as you said, it's constantly evolving, and I feel like now couldn't be a better time for this show.
Yeah, that's a very good way to look at it. And obviously. John and I, we've been running MacStories together for the past few years because, hey, I was thinking like maybe, there's people from MacStories who are going to listen to this, but maybe there's a new audience that doesn't necessarily know what MacStories is. It's a website about Apple.
The Aetherheads out there.
Exactly. Like is that how you call?
I have no idea. I have no idea what they call them. I just came up with that right now. Maybe don't run with that.
Okay.
No. I'm actually gonna use it. So if you're a Aetherhead out there, MacStories is a website about Apple. I founded MacStories 15 years ago. Gosh, in 2009. John came along in 2016. Is that right, John?
End of 2015, actually. But yeah.
End of 2015, toward the beginning of 2016. Yeah. And we've been running MacStories together ever since. We have, over the past few years, we started doing our first podcast, App Stories, all about iOS, iPadOS, and sometimes Mac apps in 2017. And after that, we launched another show called MacStories Unwind that is more about sort of a fun exploration of media and including video games. And that sort of was our training ground, I guess, for MPC. And that's when we realized we actually want to take the video game content that we talk about that mostly focuses on portable gaming, maybe deserves a broader audience and a longer conversation. And that's typically I write about iPad stuff and weird mods that I do to my iPad Pro, and and John typically writes about Mac stuff and the hundreds of different versions of his desk. Is that a fair description, John?
I think that is fair, Federico. Yeah, it's amazing to me that I'm closing in on 9 years working with you. I mean, in a former life, I was actually a lawyer, and then I hung that up and became a writer for MacStories, which is a lot of fun. I think we're living in like really interesting times right now for portable gaming. I mean, the thing that Brendon said that to me is just remarkable is that you can walk around with a little handheld device in your pocket that holds the entire Game Boy Advance library. I mean, that is the dream, right? I mean, that's just an amazing thing. The convenience, as well as the modern hardware that really makes this an incredibly interesting space right now. And for me, it was like, I've always wanted to find the right device, both for the right context and for the right kind of game. So for me, there's always something new on the horizon that's maybe a little better for the GBA, or maybe it's just a little bit better to throw in my bag and take with me on a trip. It's like those two variables to me are what make this area so interesting right now, because there's so many different kinds of devices, lots of experimentation going on. And it's just exciting. I mean, it really kicked off, I think, for, as Federico said too, for us with the Switch. But it's been more than that, because it's all these retro handhelds that came out, really started to pick up steam during the pandemic for a lot of people, including me. And then the Steam Deck came along and really showed people that you can also play some of the most, you know, the most taxing games, the console and PC games, on a handheld device, which is pretty remarkable. So there's a lot of different aspects of what's going on here, and that's why it felt like this was the right time to really dive into this topic in earnest.
Yeah, I think that's the reason why this is interesting, and sort of what we are going to try and talk about over the next few months is this idea of portable gaming not necessarily just being one thing anymore. And by that I mean, like, when I was growing up, the handheld was a Game Boy, or if you were one of the unlucky ones, I guess, a Game Gear.
I
No
had
shade,
that.
I'm sorry. No, but
Wow.
what I mean is, like, there was the portable console that was just a portable console with portable games. Like, it was its own
Right.
standalone thing. Whereas these days, portable gaming takes as many different flavors, I guess. Like, there's the idea of the hybrid console, like the Nintendo Switch, which is both portable and you can dock it. There's the dedicated retro handheld. So it's a console that usually runs some version of Linux or Android, and it allows you to install emulators. And it's mostly just about emulators that you can get from the Google Play Store usually. Then there's like the PC, the handheld PC. So stuff like a
Right,
Steam Deck,
right.
a Legion Go, an ROG Ally, all these new devices that sort of try to combine PC gaming with a handheld form factor. And lastly, there's maybe even a subcategory, which is the streaming handheld. So stuff like a PlayStation Portal, for example, not PlayStation Portable, sadly, or the Logitech G Cloud. There's even like a Razer one, I think. And so this idea of like, this is a handheld, but it's just for streaming games from a local computer or from the cloud. So all this to say, like, portable gaming is just not one siloed thing anymore. It takes multiple form factors and tries to solve multiple problems, I guess.
And I think for all of us as Apple people specifically, the rise of emulation on the App Store,
Yes.
meaning that anyone with any smartphone with access to any app store can now download emulators and run them on their phones or tablets or whatever, really just expands it pretty significantly. So the entire market of things like the Backbone One and the Razer, what is that Razer one called?
Kishi.
The Razer
Kishi.
Kishi, yes. And the GameSir devices and things like that, turning your phone or your tablet into a portable gaming device as well. That's very much on the rise. I see people playing stuff in Delta on the subway on my way to work all the time, which I think is
Wow.
remarkable.
Yeah, that's amazing. That the story of that app and how it's taken off since it finally landed on the App Store is just amazing. It was at the top of the charts, of the free charts, for something like 6 weeks, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's incredible. So yeah, I mean, to your point, Federico, we are really like covering the entire market of this stuff, and that market is so vast and so much wider than I think probably any of us thought it would be when we first got into this
Right.
stuff, years and years ago. Which I think does lead us maybe into our history with this stuff.
Yes. Why don't we start talking about sort of like our personal backgrounds with portable gaming, and why don't you go first, Brandon?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So growing up, I wasn't a person who was playing a lot of video games, believe it or not. Like when I was really young, my dad had a Sega Genesis, and I was playing his Sega Genesis every once in a while. And eventually, I think like my brain turned on, and I was like, "Oh wait, this is great," and decided like, "Hey, I want to be playing other stuff," because I saw other kids like at school with the Game Boy, like the original Game Boy. So I eventually got a Game Boy Pocket at one point, so I could play Pokemon, and that was pretty much all I played. It was that, and I think Kirby's Dream Land 2 on the Game Boy. And then from that point on, I was like all in. So it was the Game Boy Pocket, the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance, and the SP, and then moving through the Nintendo DS, which I actually just had the like tanky DS the whole time.
Yeah, really?
The DS existed.
The original one.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's a good model.
which honestly I loved. And then, I became one of those PlayStation Vita sickos. And I literally, I'm holding it right now. Like I always have it with me. It is always in eyesight.
You still use it, the Vita?
Oh yeah, constantly. Yeah, we just did an episode for Into the Aether where we just played through the entire Uncharted franchise and talked about it.
Right.
Of the two of us, I was the one with the Vita, so I had to play Golden Abyss, which is good, not great, I'd say.
Great.
Go listen to that episode if you're interested in my take on that. But I think counter to just owning all of those devices and really loving all those devices, one of the things that really stuck with me was, my dad is just kind of like a techie guy also. And at one point in like the early 2000s on our gateway computer, I just remember him saying like, hey, come look at this. And he showed me that he had downloaded an NES emulator and it just had every NES game on it. And that was my first time experiencing emulation. I didn't really fully understand what I was looking at, but I was like, oh, I can play Mario now. Oh, I can play the original Castlevania. All these games that I'd heard about from friends who had consoles that weren't the Sega Genesis, I could now get my hands on and start playing. And once I eventually kind of like wrapped my head around how to find that stuff myself, I started to kind of fill in those gaps for myself. Things like the Super Nintendo, a console that I had never had and didn't know anyone who owned, so I couldn't like go visit a friend's house and play it. I got to play through the SNES library via emulation. And, that leads me to things like eventually hacking the 3DS, hacking the Vita, and that takes me to getting the Anbernic RG351P and just like falling into the rabbit hole of these retro handhelds, which leads to all this other stuff that I own now, which is all in my eyesight.
I think it's always for most people, I would say, like a transformative experience the first time you are shown an emulator. Because I also remember when that happened for me. And I remember like thinking, first of all, how is this possible? Like the idea of here's a console, like an old console, and it's just running on your computer. Like that seemed to me when I was 12 or 13 or something, like it seemed impossible. And that sort of, I think in many ways shaped me as a person. It's like, how can I can make the computer do this and I can play video games this way? Like it seemed wild at the time. And to an extent, it's still like the appeal of emulation has never worn off for me, really, when you think about it. It's incredible.
Totally. Yeah, I feel the same way. Yeah, I mean, even when I was, I think in high school, there was one summer where I challenged myself to beat Super Mario Brothers: The Lost Levels, which was the one that was only released in Japan, and the rest of the world got the reskin Doki Doki Panic as Super Mario 2, where you like pull the radishes out of the ground or the turnips out of the ground, like throw them. But the original one wasn't released anywhere outside of Japan because they said it was quote unquote too hard, and I was like, I'm gonna beat it, and I'm not gonna use save states, and I'm not gonna do it. I'm just gonna beat this game all the way through, and it literally took me the entire summer, and that was one of those things where like, that became a weird like piece of lore between my friends and I. Whenever I saw them throughout the summer when I was like lifeguarding and stuff, they'd be like, "So you beat it yet?" I'd be like, "Nope, not yet." And then I'd go home after my shift at the lake, and I would just like sit there on my laptop and try and play because I didn't even have a controller. I was just playing with like the keyboard.
Wow.
And was just trying to beat that game for like an entire summer. And those are the experiences that I could only have because of things like emulation, and because all of these developers have, I think, done an incredible job of making sure that the history of this medium stays intact and that we're always able to have experiences like that, even when the rights holders and the IP holders are kind of like uninterested in providing access to that kind of stuff. There's a whole world of people online and around the world who are invested in that and maintaining that history. And I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah, especially when especially I think now that that emulators can be on the iOS App Store. I think that has shown a lot of people like just how cool and fun it can be to play old games despite the circumstances of the rights holders just straight up not being interested. I saw somebody post somewhere, must have been on Threads, I think, or Mastodon, I don't remember, a few days ago, that the one company that got so close to having the perfect sort of system for emulation in a legal way was the Wii U Virtual Console and Nintendo.
Yes.
And it's like they got so close and then they shut everything down. But
that's the thing for Nintendo, at least. This could be a whole other episode of this podcast, but like for Nintendo, at least, emulation and respecting their own backlog and providing it to people is a break glass in case of emergency thing for them, right? It's like, the Wii U is failing, therefore we can dip into this library because we know people want it and we know people will buy it. Whereas the Switch, we're getting this like drip feed of stuff through their subscription platform, just because they don't really need to be providing everything the same way they did with the Wii U, which is like a little bit of a bummer to have this entire incredible history that people want to be engaging with and kind of not be allowed to because Nintendo's like, we don't need it.
Yeah.
It's really interesting with the emulators on iOS and iPadOS now because it's really taking some of the best technology and applying those games to it. I mean, now we've got you've got an OLED iPad that you can play classic games on. It's just amazing. It's so fast and the screen is so good that there's just not a better way to play a lot of these games. And I think that's going to be a real eye opener for a lot of people over the next several months.
I was setting up RetroArch on my iPad last night, the new M4 iPad Pro, and I realized that there's a setting on RetroArch that lets you turn HDR on, and it was like blindingly bright to open up Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep on the PSP with HDR on. It was like a jump scare.
That is, I've actually been thinking about Kingdom Hearts. I never played Kingdom Hearts. This is one of my confessions.
I never have either.
I never played, and I saw that it's coming to Steam because now Square Enix has realized they need to put out their games on more places if they want to make money.
More than just Sony.
And I'm actually like, this could probably be a separate conversation, but hey, I'm just gonna ask you directly, Brendon. Is Kingdom Hearts a good game?
Yeah, Kingdom Hearts is like one of the most formative franchises in my life, I would say. So definitely not coming from an objective side here.
Okay, that's high praise.
But I really love Kingdom Hearts. I think there's a thing about the team that made that game about they just really understand what adolescence feels like and what being like kind of an angsty teenager feels like. And I think even if you are years removed from that experience, there's still going to be something deeply relatable to the character work that's happening there. And then you have all the fun Disney stuff, which I think is like great. And if you have any reverence for Final Fantasy at all, you're going to lose your mind as you see all those people pop up.
All right. We'll put a pin in this and we'll talk about it maybe when it launches on Steam. John, what's your portable gaming story? And specifically, what Game Boy did you have when you were a lawyer?
It's true. I am a little older than both of you fellas. And so the Game Boy Color came out right about the time I was getting out of law school and starting working. And I had a Kiwi Lime Game Boy Color. And I just absolutely loved that thing. I loved the bright green color. It was just an amazing handheld. And, over the years, in those early years in the 90s, I had a Game Boy Advance SP, and I did have the Game Gear, Federico. I did. I fell for the screen, really, which is something that is probably a thread through my history with portable gaming. I fell for that screen, but the fact that there were only 300 and some games ever released for it, and that it chewed through batteries, it's just remarkable how much money you could spend on batteries trying to run a Game Gear. You had to really play it plugged in because I don't even remember. It took something like six triple A's, double A's, or maybe it was 8. It was just a ton of batteries, and it would only last a matter of hours before you would have to drop in new batteries. I mean, talk about bad for the environment. But I did have the Game Gear. But then, life got in the way. I got married, I had kids, and there was a big, long gap in my portable gaming history where I kind of lived vicariously through my kids for a while because they're the ones who had the DS. And we had DSs around. We had a DSi. I had kind of like the white one that was mimicking the iPod a little bit. Yeah. And then the matte black version of the DS. And I eventually, when I finally got back in, it was through the 3DS. And at that time, I was buying a lot of the games on the online store. And then during the pandemic, I got back into, I guess so, all right, 3DS to the Vita.
Right.
kind of late in the history of the Vita, I got into that.
Nice. It means life.
Yeah. And from there, and of course, there's a story behind my Vita. It disappeared from my house when I moved, and I think my wife threw it away.
Oh, no.
I don't know.
No.
But
Tragic.
I don't currently have a Vita, but I got to get one because I've got a bunch of games on the store still. In any event, at the time I got back into those and then into the same model Ambernick handheld that you had, Brendon, but
Yeah.
the metal version. I started digging around my house and I found all those old DSs. I found my Game Boy SP. I found my Color. I found all that stuff, found all the games and consolidated it all. And that's really what lit the fuse for me of getting back into these older games. But it was kind of the contrast of trying to play those cartridges on that old hardware, which, it's fine, but it's certainly not modern, and it's not what you would expect having come from like using an iPhone or even using those Ambernick devices. And that's what I think for me really got me back into looking for ways to play those games, those older games on modern hardware. And then that just kind of evolved from there into getting into the more modern stuff anyway, like, the Steam Deck and the Switch really got me going on that as well, because I realized that just kind of given my lifestyle, I play more games if I can do it handheld. I like playing on my TV. I think it's great to play on a PC or a Mac or whatever too, but with a portable, the flexibility is what really gives me the time to play as much as I'd like.
Yeah, that was one of the miracles of the Switch, I think. And that was the thing that
Yep.
I remember early on in the Switch's life cycle, that was always a talking point for each game that was released. I think people aren't having this conversation as much anymore, but it was always like, okay, this new game that came out for Switch, is it better handheld or docked? Like, do you like playing it in bed or on the couch, or do you like playing it on the TV? And that was always
Right.
kind of the back and forth. Was like, Breath of the Wild. That's weirdly a game that feels better in handheld. Super Mario Odyssey feels better docked. But even just having that flexibility and letting each person come up with that answer for themselves, I think was like miraculous. And as we've been talking about, has just shifted the entire industry.
Yeah, and maybe we take it a little for granted now, like the idea of like, yeah, you can play handheld, but I remember like distinctly
Right.
when Breath of the Wild came out, like for months, it was like the point was like you can have this incredible massive game just in your hands and you can play anywhere and you can sleep and resume like at any point you can just put the
Yes.
switch to sleep and pick it up again, which is like sleep and resume, still one of the unsung features of the Nintendo Switch that the Steam Deck has, but that all the other Windows-based handhelds cannot support because Windows is terrible for sleep
Right.
and resume. So yeah, that's a really good point. My portable gaming story, as I was thinking about this, I realized it kind of started because when I was like 6 or 7, I ended up in the hospital. So I was running this really high fever. I was 7, I think, and my mom, she got really concerned and she took me to a hospital where I stayed for like a couple of days. And it was nothing. It was just a really high fever. I guess they wanted to run some tests on me or whatever. And so when I returned home, sort of as a consolation prize of sorts, she bought me a Game Boy, like the original one. So for context, this must have been 1994, 1995. And obviously, the Game Boy launched in 1989. I believe it was like a year later, maybe in Italy. So it was like
Yeah.
already a 4-year-old console. But yeah, so when I returned home, she got me this Game Boy, the original, the big gray Game Boy. And she bought me one without any games. So, and I think now I can see why she was confused. Because at the time, do you guys remember those like, oh gosh, what are they called? Like Mattel or like Tiger Electronics?
Mattel,
Mattel,
yes.
yeah.
Those dedicated one game things.
with the tiny screens, like
Right.
Right.
Like almost the Game & Watch.
exactly, kind of like a Game & Watch. And so I think my mom thought that just by buying a Game Boy, I would also have the games on it.
Yes.
Just like one of those handhelds. And so I remember just telling her, like, Mom, I also need to buy the games, like the cartridges. And just for a couple of days, I just stared at the blank animation of the Game Boy when you turn it on without any cartridge in it. Like that's
Wow,
Oh,
that's
man.
it was
sad.
very sad. And then she took me to a store, and my first game ever was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 for Game Boy. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's where it all started. And then, of course, I moved to a Game Boy Color with Pokemon Yellow, eventually a Game Boy Advance. This is also when I started playing games as much as possible in English. It started with Pokemon Yellow, and that's why I've always been fascinated with the English language since a very young age.
What caused you to do that, Federico? What was the spark?
Because I wanted to play the game early.
Oh,
Okay,
really?
Makes sense.
Yeah, because at the time, the PAL release of games was delayed. So it used to be Japan, America, and eventually Europe and Australia. And I realized at a young age by reading game magazines that I could sort of like cheat on my friends in Italy by having a copy early if I could convince a store in my hometown of Viterbo, Italy, to import a game from the United States. And so I gotta say thank you to my mom for putting up with me when I was like 8 and asking her to pay double the price for a game just so that I could play it in English months in advance. So thank you, Mom, for doing that.
There's an alternate universe where you wanted to go even earlier and learn Japanese instead of English also.
Right,
That
right.
is an alternate timeline. Yeah, I mean, yes, that is possible. So all the generation of Game Boys, the sort of the pivotal point for me, I think, in many ways, was the PSP, and specifically modding the PSP. I was in high school when the PSP came out, and we used to spend a lot of time in high school in computer class. This is like mid 2000s computer class. It's like very old PCs, and they're quote unquote teaching you to use like Microsoft Excel or Internet Explorer. That was computer class. And so I was using Internet Explorer. I was just browsing around video game websites. And one of the video game websites that was around at the time was called PSP Updates. And I remember distinctly coming across PSP Updates one day in computer class and reading about the fact that you could mod a PSP via software and install alternative programs on it, like homebrew software on it. And that I remember staring at the computer and be like, what? And I saw like the first screenshots of people playing like Super Nintendo games on a PSP.
Oh, yeah.
And that like in hindsight was one of my pivotal moments in my portable gaming life. Like installing SNES 9X on a PSP and playing and finishing Super Metroid on a PlayStation Portable. Like that was a defining time for me.
Amazing.
Probably defining from just a tech angle too for you, the tinkering that you do today.
Yes, it really, honestly, like that computer class in high school and PSP Updates, which is sadly no longer around. I remember like there was this guy like making mods for the PSP, the Fungita mod, I believe it was called. Yeah, that was a key time of my life. And then of course I had a DS. I had a period of like pause also, like after finishing high school, when I needed to figure out what to do with my life. I didn't play a lot of games for a couple of years. I never had a PS3, for example. And then I moved back to a 3DS, and from the 3DS to the Vita. And then, of course, Nintendo Switch. And, after the past 7 years, I think we've all had a pretty similar trajectory where it's like Nintendo Switch, pandemic with lockdowns. Ooh, cool. Android-based handhelds and those, and then Steam Deck, and then everything else. So that was sort of the path. Yeah.
I love that we were all Vita people.
Oh,
I didn't even realize that until.
I love the Vita
best.
so much.
The Vita, I think. I mean, obviously, first of all, John, I should say I am gonna give you. Don't buy a Vita. I have two, and I'm gonna give you one.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Yes, that's obviously at least I know it's gonna find a good home.
It will have.
It's gotten so easy to get custom firmware on there too. In the past year and a half.
Yeah.
So
Really? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
it's gonna be a breeze.
Yeah, you can install. I think
nice,
it's called the Infinity mod, and it's a permanent software mod that just lets you.
Oh, nice.
And there's some folks who do some really crazy things with the Vita these days. Like I saw people streaming Moonlight from a gaming PC to their PS Vitas because they love the OLED display so much. Obviously, the Wi-Fi of the Vita kind of sucks, but you can do it.
Yeah, it does. But the fact that it was OLED too, I mean, that's kind of amazing when you think about it. They were really ahead of the curve on that front.
Yeah.
I so very much miss the days of Sony going all weird and very high end with portable gaming.
Yep.
Like
Same.
the PSP, I remember when the PSP came out, what was that? 2004, 2005?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It felt so incredibly premium and
Oh yeah.
impossible to achieve. I have these memories of me getting a PSP and just showing to my friends who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Like, what was it? GTA Liberty City Stories?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And they were like, how is this? Like, because we were all coming from a Nintendo DS or from a Game Boy Advance,
Right.
and seeing
Right.
GTA was like, how is this even possible? And yeah,
Did you have any movies or anything on the UMD
I did.
discs?
The only movie that I have and that I still have, it's in the other room in storage.
I'm so excited.
It's 8 Mile, the Eminem movie.
Of course it's 8 Mile.
Perfect. That's great.
That is the one entertainment thing that I have on my PSP on UMD is 8 Mile that I actually watched on my PSP a couple of times. Yeah,
Okay.
I love that.
yeah. I mean, it's Sony really wanted it to be the new Walkman. Like I remember on at the time.
Yes.
20 years ago, like I still have at my mom's place, like video game magazines from
Yeah.
that era. Like the idea was, this is the new Walkman, and you can
Right.
for context, like this is the same era. Just like the iPod was exploding as a market, as an idea, like the concept of like a portable MP3 player, and Sony. They were caught maybe by surprise by the success of the DS, obviously the Game Boy, but also the DS and the iPod. And they were like, what are we doing here? We have the PlayStation, which is a beloved brand, and we used to have the Walkman. Why don't we try and combine the two into the...
Smush them
Yes.
together, yes.
And I mean, I was...
Brilliant in theory.
Yes, exactly. Like, I gotta come clean. I did have my music library on a PSP also. Like, I used to do it.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, Microsoft tried to do the same thing with the Xbox, and it didn't work there either. It's interesting to me that these kind of combo devices have never really taken off, I don't think.
Yeah, but the Vita, though, so many years later, when Sony, I think there's an interesting parallel to what Brendon said a few minutes ago about the Wii U and Nintendo toward the end of the life cycle of the Wii U, sort of saying, hey, we just got to put emulation on this thing. Like, we just need to do something here. And I think there's an interesting parallel with the PS Vita and Sony sort of trying their big budget releases at first and then realizes, well, we got to do something here. Why don't we let this become the indie portable console? And so,
Yes.
Yep.
and actually,
Yep.
that indie initiative was was managed and advocated for by a good friend of mine and Shahid Ahmad. I do another video game podcast with him on Relay FM, and Shahid was the person in charge at the time to reach out to developers and to indie game developers and be like, advocating for the PS Vita as a portable
Amazing.
platform where to put those games. And so that era of like Hotline Miami, Super Crate
Right.
Box, like on the PS Vita.
That's why I bought one, Federico. It was the indie scene that really got me to buy a Vita.
Yeah.
Me too. I was so deep in the well of roguelikes, and I feel like every roguelike I loved on PC was coming out on Vita, so I was like, I have to
Right.
get a Vita. It was that, and I was also writing for a video game website that doesn't exist anymore, and everyone on staff had a Vita, and everyone was talking about how great Persona 4 was, and I was like, I have no idea what that is. I don't even play turn-based RPGs, but I got to pick one of these things up and see what's up here. Because the idea that I could go from dumping 1,000 hours into Binding of Isaac on my computer to another 1,000 hours on the PlayStation Vita was like a dream to me.
Or Rogue Legacy, like
Yeah, Rogue Legacy, Nuclear Throne.
yes.
Spelunky was always the biggest one for me. And the idea of having Spelunky on the go was like a dream.
yeah. So that's sort of our backgrounds, I think, in terms of where we come from, and obviously, so. Right now, the plan for this podcast is to release a new episode every couple of weeks. weeks. Every 2 weeks, there's going to be a new episode. And we're obviously still figuring out the format, but this is roughly sort of like we're thinking about doing like an hour-long episodes. And we'll see, obviously what happens over the next few months. And in terms of like how many different portable consoles come out, how many news we need to cover. But we thought for this introductory episode that it could be useful for listeners to get a sense of what how our perspectives have been shaped over the years by portable consoles. Before we wrap up, though, and obviously I think what I'm about to say should be, if not one, even multiple dedicated episodes. But I think as an appetizer, let's put it like that. Before the next episodes, why don't we quickly go through what our setups look like today? What are we using now in terms of portable gaming? And why don't you go first, John?
All right. So I've got a bunch of different devices that are my primary ones these days. There's the Iron Odin 2, which I picked up late last year and absolutely love. I've got the OLED Switch, primarily for first-party Nintendo games. I followed your lead, Federico, and I purchased a Legion Go and an eGPU, which I absolutely love. I just like the tinkering of it, and I also enjoy the fact that I've got my access to my Steam library plus a bunch of retro games on there. Then I've got a Miu Mini Plus, which was a kind of an impulse purchase a few months ago that I'm using primarily for Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games.
One of the many impulse purchases.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of those. We haven't even gotten into my deep and wide collection of controllers. I have too many controllers. I have dozens of controllers.
I saw you post on Instagram yesterday an 8BitDo controller I had literally never seen before in my entire life.
I saw that photo. I was like, what is John doing?
I went right to Google. I was like, what is this? Is this new?
Yes.
Is this old?
No,
Where
it's
did this come
old.
from?
It's old. It's old. Yeah, that was pretty funny. And I guess the final thing for me is just I'm getting back into the iPhone and iPad as a gaming platform. I've both for the emulation stuff, but also I'm really trying to re-explore all the games that are on that platform too, because the screens on those devices are so good. And with some of the great controllers that you can put around a phone or an iPad these days, it's really a great option. So I'm in the process of kind of re-exploring what games are available there too.
Nice. Very nice. What about you, Brendon?
Yeah, so weirdly similar actually to John's now that I'm looking at the list next to each other. So John buying the Iron Odin 2 actually convinced me to get one because I had the original Iron Odin and liked it a lot, but I found that it was like not quite up to the task of just getting things to work immediately. And based on my conversations with you, John, and just watching a bunch of reviews, it seemed like the Iron Odin 2 was the one. So I got the Iron Odin 2 Pro. I got it in white, and it's like it is the dream. It is the dream handheld emulator, I think. I love it to death. We'll, I'm sure, talk about it in another episode. I have also written about this a lot on my blog, Wavelengths, but I kind of have this like 3-pillar approach to handheld emulators. So the Iron Odin 2 is specifically for stuff like, GameCube, PS2, and game streaming. Like that's kind of the avenue that I've gone with that. But one step down from that, I use the Retroid Pocket Flip for like Nintendo DS because it has a touchscreen and kind of looks like a DS, and for like long RPGs. So I'm playing through the entire Dragon Quest franchise on the Retroid Pocket Flip, and I like it a lot. And then one step below that, I have the Miu Mini Plus. For now, at least, is the one that I kind of always have in my bag with me as I'm commuting because, like I said before, I'm on the subway every day going to and from work, and having a handheld emulator for that trip is great. I also have the Steam Deck, which I got at launch, for obvious reasons, just to kind of fill in a gap for me because I didn't have anything that I could play my Steam library on. I have the Switch OLED, which I love dearly, like you, John, just for first-party stuff. I haven't like modded it or done anything to it. And outside of that, I have the iPhone with a Backbone controller, which I'm using increasingly. I think the thing for me is I've always been an iOS guy and I've always been an iPhone guy. And every like 3 or 4 years, I would always switch to Android for like 6 months, literally just to get Pokemon on my phone. And that was it. Like that was the only thing I wanted on my. I was like, I just want Pokemon on here, whether that be through Nintendo or through emulation. Like I just want to be able to play Pokemon on my phone, and now I can do that on my iPhone, which is a dream. And as I just mentioned, I got the new iPad Pro, and I've been using that with an 8-bit controller, and also a joy. And then I also have a modded Vita, a modded 3DS. I have the Playdate. I have a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have too much stuff.
Yeah, I still have a bin full of all those old DSs and Game Boys and everything in my house too.
Yeah.
So you may have noticed, both of you, that I don't have a section for my setup in these notes, right?
Yes, I did notice
Why
that.
do you think that is?
Because you have a surprise. You always have a surprise.
This is my first time being on the receiving end of a.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Federico
I saw
surprise.
this one coming a mile away.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, you've weathered this storm many times.
I have been preparing for this moment for like 2 months.
Federico's about to launch a Kickstarter for his own portable handheld.
Right.
I have been anticipating this moment for quite some time now, and I knew that it was gonna be the perfect way to wrap up episode 1 of MPC with just a surprise that I'm gonna show you in a bit, and that then we can talk about in future episodes. So obviously, let's start simple. Like I also have like an iPhone with a controller. I'm using a GameSir G8 that I personally modded to extend so that I can also attach it to a 13-inch iPad Pro. And especially the new iPad Pro with the M4 and OLED display, I've really been enjoying as a way to stream games from my gaming PC. The OLED screen is incredible, and yeah, the combination with the iPad Pro with the GameSir controller is great for emulators or from streaming, including GeForce Now and Xbox Cloud. I don't have a Steam Deck OLED anymore because I sold it. I have a Legion Go, which is my primary sort of Windows-based handheld these days. I have then obviously a collection of like older handhelds. Like I have a modded PSP, a modded PS Vita. I don't have a modded 3DS, but I have, I believe, 2 or 3 3DS units because I was into buying the special edition Pokemon ones a few years ago.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So I got
I was about to tell you I could send you one because I have a bunch of extras also.
I have the Pikachu one and the Pokeball 3DS, and both look really nice. I have a Playdate. Yeah, I have a long list of like I have a modded GBA with the new IPS screen, like all that sort of stuff I do have, and maybe we could talk about that in the future. But now I'm going to need you guys to turn on video for our call because this is the moment I've been waiting for. So obviously the thing I've been using a lot lately is the Legion Go, right? It's my primary, and I got it right here. It's my primary handheld these days. And I really love this thing so much. And like John, I still have a 1X GPU, eGPU. It's a portable eGPU that allows you to sort of boost your performance of the Legion Go. It's running like an AMD laptop GPU, and that's more powerful than the Z1 chip that you have inside the Legion Go. But I love this handheld so much. Despite some of its flaws, because the controllers could be a little more comfortable. It could use some weight reduction and all of that. I really like this thing so much. And so 2 months ago, I started thinking, well, the Legion Go is one of the few handhelds that actually, I think it's the only handheld that has embraced USB 4. And I started thinking, what can I do with USB 4? USB 4 is, if you are into external graphics cards, which again we'll talk about in the future, USB 4 has many benefits compared to Thunderbolt 4. Specifically, it has much bigger bandwidth, which allows you to not lose performance from a graphics card. We're talking here where with a Thunderbolt-based setup, you're basically losing like 50% of your performance or something, to losing maybe 15 or 20%, and generally speaking, just 15% of the performance. And so I started thinking, well, how can I really go all in and maximize my Legion Go? Because I really love playing games at night in bed next to my dogs and my girlfriend. I don't want to go to my living room. I don't want to go to my office. I would very much prefer staying there with the Legion Go and just run a USB cable and play games off of my eGPU. And well, I built the most overkill. And I actually think I built the best eGPU in the world. And it's this thing.
Oh my gosh.
It's a USB 4 eGPU.
It looks like a microwave oven.
It's a USB 4.
It looks like you duct taped a microwave to an Xbox Series S.
Right.
It is a USB 4, pure USB 4 eGPU with a 4090 inside.
Oh,
wow.
man.
Wow.
This thing. So, we'll talk about this in the future. This thing is a monster. It's what makes it unique is it's using one of the only two pure USB 4 boards in existence that you can use for eGPUs.
Okay.
It doesn't have Thunderbolt. It's just USB 4, and this is what I connect to my Legion Go. And this thing is incredible. And this, John, this thing.
This is how you almost set your house on fire.
This is how I
it?
almost set my house on fire. I told Brendon.
It can't be contained.
I told John about this story 2 days ago. I was playing Dragon's Dogma. It was 3 a.m. And at one point, the game froze. I was like, oh, what's wrong here? And so I went from the bedroom into my office, and I could see that the game had just stopped running. And so I thought, well, must be something wrong with the eGPU. So I turned it off, turned it on again, and I heard a loud pop in front of my face. And I saw smoke come out of the enclosure. And I was like,
man.
I thought I was gonna die, honestly. Like, I thought, oh, okay, I am setting, it's 3 a.m., my girlfriend is sleeping, the dogs are sleeping. I am in the process of setting my house on fire right now. And my heart started racing. And it smelled horribly. Like
Sure. Nothing like transistors burning
basically
and plastic and PCBs.
Long story
and
short,
all that.
unfortunately these things may happen. I got a faulty power supply, and it wasn't even like from a good brand. Like it was a proper power supply, but I got a faulty one, and it blew a fuse inside. And thankfully, it did not damage anything else. But that is the story. This is
frying the 4090 would have been an expensive thing.
Yeah.
Oh man. We'll talk about this.
Yeah, in this order, I'm glad you're okay, and I'm glad the 4090 is okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So yeah, I've been building this thing for 2 months now. And I was waiting for this reveal because I thought, hey, it'll be fun to just put it out on the first episode of NPC, because eGPUs are like a topic that I would like to explore in the future. And there's some interesting changes coming on that front soon. And like, I thought there's also like an article that I want to do for MacStories about like how I completely rethought my desk around having this eGPU and what it means for like the work that I do, but also the games that I play. And so, yeah, it's this thing right here. It's a beast.
Very cool.
That's exhilarating.
Yeah,
I love it.
I'm happy for
Thank you.
I can't wait to hear more about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
The handheld PC plus eGPU thing, I am like so far away from at the moment, and I'm really concerned what's going to happen like 2 or 3 episodes into this podcast.
Don't worry.
Talking to you guys about it.
Don't worry about it. I got you.
Yeah, we'll get you up to speed, Brendon. We'll get you up to speed.
Yes.
This is my worst nightmare.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that pretty much does it for this inaugural episode of MPC, Next Portable Console. You can find show notes for this episode on MacStories. You can go to macstories.net/MPC. Pretty easy to say and pretty easy to type. And there's going to be links of the things that we mentioned during this episode. You can find me on Threads and Mastodon as Viticci. That's Viticci. Where can people find you, Brendon?
Yeah, you can find me on Threads at Brendon Bigley. You can find me on Into the Aether. That's intothecast.online. And you can also find my writing at Wavelengths, which is wavelengths.online.
Excellent. And where can people find you, John?
And they can find me over at MacStories.net, as well as, of course, our other podcasts, App Stories and MacStories Unwind. Plus, you can find me on Threads and Instagram and Mastodon as John Voorhees.
All right. Excellent. Well, I'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Bye.